Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast. Here is your host.
Let's send it over to Rick Bucher.
Rick Bucher.
Welcome to another episode of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast Network. I'm Rick Bucher. You can read my stuff on Bleacher Report and on Twitter at Rick Bucher. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Bucher Friends. And if you're not aware, please drop us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. In fact, you don't even have to write a review. Just screenshot your review or the number of stars that you give us. Tweet it to us at Bucher Friends, and you'll be entered for a chance to win some free prizes. We just gave away a Jerry Rice autographed football, and we have some more stuff lined up. So please join us in that. Get some free stuff. Now, normally, again, this is a time where every week I have a special guest, a player, a coach, an executive, somebody in the NBA. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been going solo because we've had some topics that I felt that I wanted to get to. I wanted to delve into more deeply, and having a guest wasn't going to allow me to do that. And once again, I find us in the middle of the week with one of these topics that bears discussion. And it is the idea of hiring one person to be both the head coach and the general manager. And the idea that it's now been proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it does not work. I believe we've long known that, but I don't believe that it won't happen again. Look, the notion of one person having the authority to be both of an NBA team is illogical. The last guy to do it, to dupe an owner into believing that he can both be the race car driver and the pit crew chief at the same time, was Tom Thibodeau. And he's been relieved of his duties by the Minnesota Timberwolves and owner Glenn Taylor, leaving them, not surprisingly, with a car in worse shape than when he got it. Now, while Tibbs being let go, same with Stan Van Gundy, who had held dual roles with the Detroit Pistons, both of them having been let go, faced the same fate. It doesn't surprise me. But something that ESPN's Bobby Marks tweeted out did. Now, Marks is listed as an NBA front office insider. He's a former assistant GM for the Nets, and by my estimation, he's a pretty smart dude. But what he tweeted after Tibbs was fired really surprised me. Marks wrote, "Would be surprised if we see an owner in the future hand over the dual responsibility of president GM to a head coach. The body of work in the past proves that it does not work." And I laugh because he's right. It's been proven that it does not work. Over and over again. It's been proved not to work since Red Auerbach pulled all the strings for the Boston Celtics. And that was an age when the demands of both jobs in no way compared to what they are now. It didn't work with Rick Pitino, also with the Celtics. Didn't work with Don Nelson or Isaiah Thomas or Kevin McHale or PJ Carlissimo or Stu Jackson or Mike Dunleavy, well, you get the idea. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few that were both head coach and had final say on personnel. They just didn't have both titles. But if winning a championship is the goal, it could easily be argued that it has never worked since Auerbach. Now, maybe you include Red Holtzman with the Knicks, since I imagine in the 60s and 70s, head coaches were the ultimate authority. But in the modern era, it has never come close to working. Yes, Pat Riley technically had full authority when he replaced Stan Van Gundy and coached the Heat to the 2006 title. But there are some distinctions there. One, he came down 21 games into the season. It wasn't the plan, but Shaquille O'Neal was done with Stan Van Gundy and basically asked Pat to come down. And he was essentially done with his role as the team president and GM, as the architect of the team. He'd already built it. And so he really only had one role to focus on. And two, if you look at the aftermath, It clearly didn't work the subsequent 2 seasons before he gave way to Erik Spoelstra. He handed Spoelstra a team that had won 15 games the year prior. Now, the only possible exception to all this is Gregg Popovich with the San Antonio Spurs, who has had the ultimate authority with them since he took over as head coach 18 games into the 96-97 season. And he's won 5 championships over the stretch since then. There's a couple factors to consider here, though, that make Pop an all-time unicorn. First, for all of his curmudgeonly, I don't tolerate stupid questions and I hate sideline reporters who interview me between quarters demeanor, he may have the least ego of any coach, any head coach I've ever met. And I mean that sincerely. I mean any head coach I've ever met. And certainly the least of all the ones I've known who have as much power as he does. There is no one who seeks out the opinions of others and is willing to have his mind changed more than Pop. Also, one other thing to consider here, for all the talent the Spurs had, they were never able to win back-to-back titles. And I can't help wonder if the Spurs had had a true independent personnel decision maker gifted with Tim Duncan and David Robinson, that they might have found a way to nail the one missing accomplishment that makes it so hard to place them among dynastic franchises and all-time great teams. They never won back-to-back titles. And for those, maybe I'm jumping too far ahead. For those who don't understand, being an NBA coach is an emotionally wrought job. You're in a foxhole on a daily basis. 82 games, and then plus, if you're lucky, the ups and downs, the travel. Like, you are embedded with your team and your players, and you are living from minute to minute, moment to moment, and you need to find a way to sort of balance it out. You can't react to every single thing as a head coach. You have to figure out, what is it that I have to address? What is it that I let go? How do you deal with all these different things? The immensity of just preparing for 82 games and the PR and media responsibilities that go along with all that. The possibility of being in tune with personnel around the league and to be able to take a step back and have a clear-eyed view of your player's value, it's impossible. It can't possibly be done. Anybody who has done it knows that. The desire to have personnel control is a protective measure. It's because I want the guys that I want. I don't want to inherit, or I don't want to have anybody telling me who I should play or who is going to be on my roster. It also gives you a tremendous amount of authority over those players. I get, in one sense, why someone would want to do it or want to have it. But it speaks of a lack of trust in someone else having their back and making decisions. And in a way of being able to work with someone else who may be bringing a different mindset to the table. But ultimately, what a GM has to do is not only an entirely different, demanding job, but it requires a mindset that is almost completely different from the mindset that a coach should have in order to be successful. Now, and it's not as if owners living in the past are the ones who continue to make this same mistake over and over again. Yes, Glenn Taylor of the Timberwolves, one of the more vintage owners in the league, hired Thibodeau. But 3 of the newest owners in the league, Tom Gores of the Pistons, Steve Ballmer of the Clippers, and Bruce Levinson of the Atlanta Hawks, are the latest to make the inexplicable choice of hiring one person to be both architect and contractor at the same time. And by the way, if you have a favorite analogy that captures how ridiculous thinking the head coach and GM of an NBA team can be the same person, send them to @BucherFriends, and I will happily retweet the best ones. Oh, my producer might even send you a cash prize. Probably not, but who knows? Anyway, why did Levinson hire Mike Budenholzer as coach and president? Why did Ballmer do the same with Doc Rivers, or in that case, elevate Doc from just head coach to coach and whatever the front office title was, giving him full authority? Why did Tom Gores choose Stan Van Gundy to be two people? Because they were afraid they wouldn't get them, or in the case of Ballmer, keep them as the head coach if they didn't, which is the wrong damn reason. If you think, it's as simple as this. If you think your company can't function without any one person, then you don't know the business, or your company is not very well built. And let's not confuse this with the NFL, because there are plenty of situations in the NFL, successful situations, where the head coach also has authority over personnel. There have been some examples in which it didn't work, but there are enough to say that the NFL is not like the NBA, and it's not. One man being both coach and having final say on personnel can work in football because that job is all about delegating authority anyway. An NFL head coach can't do everything. That's why a lot of really good position coaches fail as head coaches, because it's as much about managing people and recognizing priorities as it is about teaching the game. That's the case as an NBA head coach too, but not to the same degree. So the bottom line is, I will not be surprised if another owner gives both roles to one person again. I mean, look at the situation in Minnesota. We're already hearing rumors that Glenn Taylor is interested in hiring Fred Hoiberg, former Bulls head coach, to be either the head coach or the GM, as if those roles are interchangeable. Now, why would Taylor be interested in Hoiberg? Because Hoiberg played for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Because Hoiberg worked in the front office of the Timberwolves. Because he's familiar with Fred. Just as he was familiar with Tibbs. Just as Ryan Saunders, who is the son of the late Flip Saunders, is now the interim head coach. Now, I have no issue with hiring Fred or Ryan. I didn't have an issue with hiring Tibbs, other than you were hiring him to coach a really young team, and I wasn't certain that that was the best fit. And I certainly don't believe in the idea of giving any head coach control over both personnel and coaching the team. But it looks as if Taylor is operating by the same MO that has left the Minnesota Timberwolves where they are. So this idea that, another owner will never give both roles to one person again, as the wise man Don Nelson once said, I'm just looking for a rich man in trouble. because, as Nelly knows, a rich man is sometimes inclined to try and buy a solution rather than actually devise one. Or in the case of Taylor, let me just go to something familiar. There are 30 NBA GM jobs in the world. There are 30 NBA head coaches. The idea that you would give either position to someone because they're familiar seems like an acknowledgement that you really don't know what it requires to do the job. Or you don't think it requires all that much. Or your ambition just isn't all that high to have the best at the job. I don't know where else you can go. But the idea that an owner in the NBA, new or old, wouldn't hire someone to have both jobs. Let's put it this way. If Steve Kerr or Brad Stevens suddenly became available, you're telling me the Orlando Magic or the Sacramento Kings or some other franchise that has tried to find a shortcut to success, wouldn't offer a combo role if that's what it took to land Kerr or Stevens. Now, I don't know if they are, my sense is neither one of them has that aspiration, but if they did, they certainly could get it. You can't tell me that they couldn't get it. I wouldn't take that bet. One of the other subjects I wanted to get to before we put a wrap on this episode of Bucher and Friends is the latest that I'm hearing on the future of Kevin Durant. Now, I'm not giving this to you as if it's shocking news, just as I saw a report that the Spurs have interest in Kristaps Porzingis, as if that would be news. Kristaps Porzingis becomes available, there are going to be a lot of teams that are interested in Porzingis, including, and maybe most logically, the Spurs because of their history with international players. So I say this only to provide it as information, not as if I'm breaking huge news. And that's what I'm hearing is that Clippers owner Steve Ballmer is, well, the way it was put to me is that he's recruiting Kevin Durant. Now, obviously, that would be against the rules. So it begs the question, if that's happening and I'm reporting it, then how come somebody's not coming down on Steve Ballmer? So let's just leave it at this. From what I'm hearing, Ballmer is making it clear through back channels that he would be very interested in signing Durant this summer, should he decide to leave Golden State. Now, where does all that stand? Kevin's position with the Warriors. And as most of you know, I live in the Bay Area, so I spend a lot of time around that team. I've talked to Kevin on many occasions, including this season several times, but I haven't talked to him directly about this subject. So what I can tell you is what I'm hearing from around the team, from people in the league, et cetera, et cetera. And the general sense is, or the general feeling is, that he's going elsewhere, that he hasn't received his just due for winning championships and being finals MVP and all that he has accomplished. And so he's looking for, now having a couple rings in tow, where can I go and do that? It's a little bit like Kobe once he'd won a couple rings with Shaq, and everybody's still believing, well, of course, Vince Carter, Penny Hardaway, Tracy McGrady, if they'd played with Shaq, they could have won championships too. And in Kobe's mind, it was, oh, really? You think that? Watch me. And not that it was, for clarification's sake, my understanding, that he ran Shaq off as much as he wanted to clear Shaq's going to be the number 2 now, going forward. And Shaq was not going to have that. He was not abdicating his number 1 spot. So essentially, that's why it came apart. And Kobe was good with that because he was thinking, it only helps me to prove my point, which is I can use you, but I don't need you. And KD, the mindset is apparently in the same place. Let me show you. You guys don't believe I'm a champion. You don't believe I can win championships. You want to believe that the Warriors won the championship and I was just along for the ride in spite of the fact that I was the finals MVP. And I did make some of the biggest plays to make that happen. Okay, let me go and prove that to you. And obviously he can't do that with the Warriors. He can't, I would imagine, do that with the Lakers, which is why I'm hearing that's not a realistic option. If his comments about the environment around LeBron and the challenges for any star player of taking a back seat to LeBron didn't indicate that. And I don't think it did. I think in the context of our conversation, referring to a story I did about the yin and yang of playing with LeBron, I don't think anything that Durant said there was intended to say, there's no way that I would play with LeBron. It was, I'm saying he's not going there in context with what I'm hearing about why he would leave the Warriors. So the Clippers, Steve Ballmer can do all the recruiting he wants. Who knows where that ultimately goes? But I'm hearing that the New York Knicks have as good a chance as anybody. Now, what I find most interesting is that Walt Clyde Frazier, TV analyst for the New York Knicks, said last summer that he would put an asterisk on KD's championships that he's won with the Warriors because he joined a team that had already proved to be champions. And in many cases, as we saw with Bruce Bowen and the Clippers making a comment about Kawhi Leonard and that costing him his job, I don't think the same applies here with Frazier, because basically what he's saying is the reason that KD would be coming to the Knicks, which is to prove people like Frazier wrong. Or at least not wrong, but to erase the asterisks or to win a championship that doesn't have an asterisk in anyone's mind. So normally this would be a case where you think in this day and age, oh, Walt may be in trouble. And that would be quite an icon to go down because he expressed his opinion. He spoke his mind. It is a slippery slope in this day's world. And it's not so much what Walt said nor what Bruce said, but the noise that follows it, the outrage and the outcry and the echo chamber that we get that just magnifies everything and anything that anybody says, so that even if cooler heads prevail and realize in the big scheme of things what was expressed was just an opinion, it often becomes such a noisy thing that sometimes the authorities are forced to make a decision, sadly. Now, if he leaves, and this is the one caveat, is there's always the possibility, the emotional journey of winning a championship, the bond that is created as a result of everything that guys go through in winning a championship, can sometimes, just like it can convince guys to come back for another go round who are ready to retire, it can convince a guy to say, let me take another stab at this. Let me get one more of these, and then I'll go prove it elsewhere. And obviously, also depends on everything that transpires. Let's say that Steph Curry goes down, or one of the other key players, and KD is seen as the guy who carries them to that title. Does that shift things in his mind? Does that shift things in his motivation? That's why, in predicting any of these things at this point, I can tell you what is being said and what is being felt and thought, et cetera, but any prediction now about what's going to happen this summer, and this applies to all the past decisions made by players, it's always open to change because things happen and they change them. So we will continue to follow that story along with Kristaps Porzingis and the New York Knicks and the Clippers and who they might ultimately end up with. And will another team end up hiring one man to do two jobs that can't possibly be done to any degree of success? I want to thank you for listening to this edition of Bucher and Friends, or perhaps Bucher, friendless in this case. But I will have a friend in my next podcast, Ryan Hollins, former NBA center. You can see him on ESPN. You can hear him on NBA radio. You can find him on Twitter at the Ryan Hollins. He will be joining me, as he always does, on Thursday as well as Friday. But for Thursday's podcast, we will get into Andrew Wiggins having the game of his life after Tom Thibodeau exits stage right, and what we're to make of that. What are we to make of what the Timberwolves could potentially be for the remainder of this season with Saunders taking over and Tibbs no longer there? Also need to get into the very peculiar situation surrounding the Cavs signing Patrick McCaw to an offer sheet, the Warriors refusing it, the Cavaliers then agreeing to the 2-year, $6 million deal, and then waiving McCaw, apparently before it became guaranteed. And now the Warriors being upset about that. We'll delve into all the details and explain to you why they would be upset, why I don't think they should be, but why they are, along with everything else. In the meantime, thanks for listening.